Yes.
Mr. Evans, I'm going to ask you about your involvement with the Caxton Foundation next. How did you come to be appointed as one of the founding trustees of the Caxton Foundation?
Well, I think that the Department of Health had approached Peter Stevens about establishing the Caxton Foundation, and he contacted me one day, and I think he wanted to come out to my house to have a talk to me about something, and he came and invited me to be one of the three founding trustees. And the Department of Health, I think that had already been presumably agreed, but certainly the Department of Health were aware that he was approaching me, and they were supportive of it.
And as I understand your statement and the documents, you, together with the two other founding trustees, Mr. Stevens and Mr. Gore, drew up then a proposal for the structure and governance of the Caxton Foundation. Can you recall what input the Department of Health had into that process?
Not really. I'm sure they did. What most likely was that we drafted various documents and then we shared them with the department. I don't recall that, for instance, that they took the initiative in any documentation.
If we go to CAXT 40108_017. This is an early meeting, 4th of August 2011, with you, Mr. Stevens, Mr. Gore, and others. And if we go to the third page, you'll see at the bottom of the page it says this. In response to Ms. Winram, Mr. Evans said that it has been determined by the three founding trustees not to appoint beneficiaries or user trustees to the Caxton board. There was a general consensus that while the views of the beneficiary constituencies should be sought in a manner that was open and transparent, it was premature to consider the appointment of user trustees. And then there were some further observations from Mr. Gore and from Mr. Lister. Can you assist us with why the three founding trustees, of whom you were one, had decided not to appoint beneficiary or user trustees at that stage?
I can't recall, but I know, setting up the Caxton Foundation quickly was quite an embryonic process. I know at that stage we were not at all clear on who the beneficiary community would be, how many beneficiaries, if I can use that word, would be eligible, and therefore how to get some reasonable communications with them. But I think that may have been part of it.
Was there any consultation at the planning or setting up stage with prospective Caxton beneficiaries or with what might have been some representative groups of some at least of the Caxton beneficiaries, so that their contribution could inform the actual setting up process?
Well, my recollection is we were not at all clear on the beneficiary, who would be, names of individuals who would be in the beneficiary community. What I do remember is that fairly early on, we had a meeting, which I think probably around about the time of these minutes, when a number of potential beneficiaries were invited along, and how they were communicated with or identified, I can't remember. And at that stage, that was a sort of information and view exchanging meeting. Whether this came up at that meeting, I don't know. But there were all sorts of, all this was, but I left the board before much of this was resolved, but there were certainly some concerns we had about how we could find out who the beneficiaries were. The fact that this was so long ago that the hospital departments would not necessarily have records which were relevant, and also who getting medical confirmation that somebody in fact was had a condition where they would be relevant. So it wasn't a clear-cut group of people.
In your statement, if we go to WITN 3859002, please. Pick it up at the bottom of page 20.
Just before that, can I just add something to what I just said while I was reflecting? I mean, there was certainly never any intention that the beneficiary community would not be involved in some way, in a way which would be helpful to them and also helpful to us. I think the quandary around about that time was what was the best way in order to do that.
If we go to WITN 3859002, bottom of the page, paragraph 90, establishing the CF was, as far as I recall, entirely a government and DH initiative and decision. Peter Stevens, Charles Gore and I were then tasked with putting this in place. I do not recall any discussion on whether those with hepatitis B should be included. CF was left by the DH to make its own decisions regarding payments to hepatitis C sufferers. There was never an assumption that the guidelines and criteria should be the same. And then you say this: I recall that the circumstances, social and clinical needs of those with hepatitis C were perceived as different from those MFT primary beneficiaries with HIV and haemophilia. Are you able to assist us with what the perceived differences were at the time?
Well, I may have touched on clinical just now, what I was saying, but I'll come back to that if you so wish, Ms. Richard. I mean, social, many of the hepatitis, this was very early days, but many of the potential beneficiaries with hepatitis C would not also have had haemophilia, so HIV. And so their personal needs were in many ways different. I'm not saying they were any less; they were just different than those of the McFarlane Trust. I mean, I think incidentally that all we really had to build on, trying to start this from nothing really, was what experiences and what prototypes there were with MFT, rather than starting from scratch. But to some extent, we had no alternative at that stage to try and do some comparison from what we knew from MFT. But it was really about the social implications arising from having different clinical conditions from those of the McFarlane Trust community.
Now, your statement also tells us, I don't think we need to look at it, so we can take it down, that ministerial approval was required for the appointment of all Caxton Foundation trustees. And indeed, we've seen that from other evidence. Who suggested the requirement for ministerial approval, as far as you can recall?
That would have come from the Department of Health.
And did you, Mr. Stevens and Mr. Gore, simply agree with that, or do you recall whether you expressed any contrary views?
I can't recall expressing a contrary view.
There's evidence to suggest, again, I don't think I need to take you to the documents, but if you want to see them, please do. There's evidence to suggest that the Caxton Foundation was not permitted by the Department of Health to hold reserves. Did you have any involvement in that decision? Or involved in discussions?
No, I didn't. I can't recall anything of that at all. So presumably I didn't.
We know that you stepped down from the Caxton Foundation when you became chair of the McFarlane Trust. Ms. Barlow was then in 2013 appointed as chief executive of both Caxton and McFarlane. Did you consider then, or do you consider now, that there was a conflict of interest in having the same chief executive of both organisations in circumstances where only one organisation was the employer of staff, and in circumstances sorry, if I just finished, and in
No, you
circumstances where
finished.
there
I
was,
beg your pardon.
in circumstances where there was potentially a competition for a finite pot of money.
Well, a few things on that. I beg your pardon. I mean, it would have been difficult to have had two different chief executives running the two organisations. It would have been expensive. How it would have worked out in practice would have been awkward. There were plenty of similarities between the administration of the two bodies. I think to an extent I was alluding to this when we talked about the staffing arrangements earlier this morning, but there was always likely to be a perception that one of the organisations was, so I can't not think of a better phrase, but there must be one, almost sort of playing one off against the other, and that there was priority was given to one of the bodies rather than the other, which in practice I do not think was true at all. I mean, certainly when I left my role as a trustee of Caxton, I had no wish or to know very much about Caxton and to pry into what was going on, other than what I needed to in terms of our relationship between the two. And Jan Barlow was actually very firm in my recollection that if any trustees, for example, wanted information from about the other body, then she made it very clear that she could not do that, and quite rightly so. So, but I think there was certainly a feeling that was the case. I mean, I know this phrase has come up before. I haven't used it, but I mean, it's questionable whether there was one pot of money. I mean, the DH gave Caxton a financial allocation along the lines we've been talking about yesterday. They gave McFarland an allocation along the way we were talking yesterday. They gave Caxton an allocation, and presumably that was dealt with in a similar way. I mean, I don't know if the Department of Health had one sum of money which was earmarked to cover both, and in some way they divided it. They could have been completely different budgets. So there was never any evidence that that was the case. I think, incidentally, where the MFT could well have lost is that if Caxton had not come into existence, and I'm very pleased it did, then we might have found that would have had some financial benefits to the MFT, but that's pure speculation.
Can I just ask you then a handful of questions in relation to Caxton about what was and was not available during the period you were there to beneficiaries? One document to look at, CAXT 409109_043. Now, this is, as becomes apparent from the introductory paragraph, a report that was produced after you left. It's the National Welfare Committee report, and it's referring to, it's a report, I think, as at a date in 2012 after you've departed. But you were on the original National Welfare Committee for a few months, I think we learned from this. Is that right?
I think I attended one or two meetings. Yes.
If we can go to just the last page of this document, you'll see there's a grant application process, and if we go to the bottom of the page, you'll see the italicised note at the bottom. The Caxton Foundation has to ensure that all payments are used for the purpose agreed by the trustees. Therefore, vouchers will be used wherever possible, or payments will be made directly to the supplier. Now, that might suggest that vouchers, about which some have expressed concern as to the stigmatising effect, or direct payments, were being used because of a distrust of applicants, a fear that they wouldn't use the payment for the agreed purpose. Was that the thinking of the National Welfare Committee?
I do not have an opinion on the thinking of the National Welfare Committee. Vouchers was one of the ways of dealing with grant applications of the Macfarlane Trust, which was in place well before I became a Macfarlane trustee.
Do you recall any discussion?
But I cannot remember a discussion on this with the Caxton Foundation. And certainly I can never remember anywhere a discussion of mistrust.
During the time that you were involved in the Caxton Foundation, can you recall participating in any discussion or decision making about whether loans might be made available to beneficiaries?
No, I can't.
We've heard about some of the events for the beneficiary community that took place for Macfarlane Trust beneficiaries. Were you involved in any discussions or decision making about the holding of events for the Caxton beneficiary community?
No, I wasn't. I don't know whether they took place or not, because, as I said, I moved on.
Well, there'll be at least one later witness in relation to Caxton that I can perhaps take that up with. I'm going to move then to 2015 and the APPG report and the dispute with the Hemophilia Society, Mr. Evans. So if we can look first of all briefly at the APPG report, it's RLIT 5031, Shomik. You'll note, Mr. Evans, the date, January 2015. And if we go to page 32, you see there the heading evidence provided to the APPG by the 3 discretionary charities. The first paragraph talks about appeals for information to the 3 discretionary charities, which obviously would have included the Macfarlane Trust. And then the next paragraph says this: the trusts provided some but not all of the information the APPG asked for, reference then to business case. But then the 4th line, they neglected to fully address other requests for information, most notably despite the fact that a wealth of internal reports have been produced by trustees of the discretionary charities. They did not give these reports to us at our request on the grounds that they had been superseded by the more recent business case. And then there's a discussion about issues relating to the Caxton Foundation. And then the penultimate sentence, in addition, the charities were also invited to make comments on the number of grant applications refused, the number of Caxton beneficiaries who were in poverty, and other information. This was not forthcoming. Now, some of that's Caxton specific, and obviously you'd left a number of years before then, but some of this appears to be expressing a concern about the information not being provided by the other discretionary charities, the Macfarlane Trust. Can you assist us with why the APPG was not given all the information it requested?
Well, first of all, can I say that we very much welcome the APPG initiating this exercise, and Diana Johnson, who was then the chair, was very, very active, and I think Mr. Burt was as well. So we were very, very keen to cooperate on what they were doing. I cannot remember why certain documents weren't made available, and I certainly don't recall that there was any, I'm sure there was no intent on the part of the Macfarlane Trust not to be cooperative with the APPG on this matter. All I can suggest is that the documents which we did not provide, and maybe we should have, I'm not sure, but we would have been quite genuine in our reasons for not producing them.
Not going to go through the detail of the report with you, Mr. Evans, but do you accept that it contained a number of criticisms, of all sorts of matters outside of your control perhaps, but also and Department of Health funding issues and the like, but it contained also criticisms of the way in which the discretionary trusts, including the Macfarlane Trust, dealt with beneficiaries and their applications.
Yes.
This was January 2015. You were chair until, I think, May of 2016. Did the Macfarlane Trust put in place any kind of programme for analysing the criticisms and working out what to do to address them?
I don't recall that we did. Have you got the criticisms you could put on the screen?
They're sort of dotted around.
I mean, what I was going to say, I said anyway, my recollection of the report, which I will reiterate, I thought it was a very helpful piece of work, was that the criticisms in many respects were were endemic within the way the Macfarlane Trust was established and what role it was expected to carry out. Now, you will recall that in my evidence, I did question whether the Macfarlane Trust was the right, whether it was fit for purpose in the sense of why to do the job which the department wanted us to do. And my recollection, which I stand to be corrected, is that many of the criticisms were really about that. I mean, I'm not sure it was really worded that way, and I think they were ones which were relevant to what should happen with the Macfarlane Trust and the other bodies later on, which happened to be after I'd left.
Mr. Evans, you're right that there were indeed criticisms along those lines, but there were also criticisms of the way in which the discretionary trusts operated. So just by way of example, this is not exhaustive, in the executive summary, if we go to page 15, paragraph 14, same document, sorry, Shomik, yes. So that's it. You'll see there, paragraph 14, individuals who are able to access discretionary assistance, in other words, those who are eligible for either Macfarlane or Eileen or Caxton, report a range of grievances regarding the way that support is delivered. Now, I'm not going to go through them in detail, but you'll see there are various matters set out about the application process, feeling of begging, not being updated, fairness of the application system over the page. A number of them are the themes that I sought to explore with you, Mr. Evans, during the course of your evidence yesterday and today. The question is, did the Macfarlane Trust, seeing this, put in place any kind of programme for analysing the criticisms and seeing what it could do to improve the position?
Well, some of this, if not all, we'd already taken on board, because I suspect that the APPG, much of their information, were quite rightly so, have come from the beneficiary community. And we talked earlier on about issues about awareness of and decision-making processes and evidence and so forth. Certainly the first three of these, I would expect we'd already started taking action. I don't think we did it in a formal action plan, but certainly Jan Barlow, as the chief executive, would have been commissioned with carrying out that work, and also she reported back to the board in due course. And that it relates to such things as setting up a new grants committee and so forth. Regarding the fourth of those bullet points, which I think is slightly different, then to some extent I agree with that about a feeling of begging, and this really takes me back to what I've alluded to before, and that is, I think, the whole process by which support was given to the beneficiary community was not the right one.
Well, if we go just to the top of the next page and continue with that paragraph about the feeling of begging, it makes reference to the demeaning and onerous process of trying to access support, and many simply given up applying. And then this: a great deal of Macfarlane Trust recipients were of the view that the organisation was getting worse, its staff becoming more distant and it becoming harder to access assistance. Others expressed dissatisfaction with the level of proof required to access support, the waiting times for receiving payments, and the difficulty getting into contact with relevant trust staff. So that's very much about the experiences of beneficiaries in their dealings with the trust, and not just the systemic problems flowing from the setup or funding of the trust. Do you agree that do you agree that the Macfarlane Trust should have looked and worked through all these various criticisms and drawn up an action plan?
I think it would have been helpful to have done that, seeing this list now.
Do you have any recollection of there being any discussion of that? And if there was, will we find it in the minutes? Again, I don't want to trawl you through months of minutes.
I have no recollection, but it is possible there is something in the minutes. I'm sure you will find quite a lot in the minutes about the APPG report and how we're going to action it.
Okay, all right. Well, we'll undertake that further paper trail. You attended a meeting. We can take the document down. Thank you. Not long after the publication of the APPG report, you attended a meeting on the 29th of January of 2015 with Ms. Barlow and Mrs. Liz Carroll, the Chief Executive of the Hemophilia Society. Why did you go along to that meeting, as far as you can recall?
Well, the intention of the meeting was a very informal catch-up, as it were, over a cup of tea with the two chief execs and the two chairs. And Bernard Manson, the chair of the Hemophilia Society, was not able to attend. And I decided it might be helpful if I were to go along anyway.
Had you previously met Mrs. Carroll?
I met her at such events as APPG meetings. I don't recall I'd ever had been in a formal meeting with her.
What's your recollection of the discussions at and the course of that meeting?
It was a very, I came out of the meeting thinking it would have been very helpful. It was an exchange of views on issues about current financial situations for both of us, the way forward, and what might happen about the government reviewing the whole of the process and so forth. And I'm sure we talked about other things as well, but that was it. It was very informal changing of views on various issues.
Do you recall any discussions about the Penrose Inquiry, which was at that point in time, I think a report was anticipated in the following few months?
I don't recall, but it's possible it was mentioned because, as you said, the Penrose was due to report quite soon afterwards. A few months afterwards, I think it was. But it may have come up in conversation, but I don't recall.
And do you recall any discussions about the process for nominating trustees by the Hemophilia Society or anything along those lines?
I can't, but it's possible. I think there might have been a vacancy at the time. We may have talked about how that was going to be filled or something. It was a very sort of wide-ranging discussion, but it's quite likely that came up.
Do you recall Ms. Barlow saying anything to the effect that, in the context of a discussion about whether it's the Penrose Inquiry or campaigning issues or obtaining answers, something to the effect that the Department of Health should wait as long as possible before making any decisions, as more people would have died and there would be less people to pay?
No, I don't recall her saying that, and if she did so, I would have remembered it.
Now, do you recall anything being said, either by you or Miss Barlow, that was in any respect similar to that comment?
No.
If we look, please, at MACF 5059 underscore 047. This is a letter that was sent by Mrs. Carroll on behalf of the Hemophilia Society, dated the 10th of February 2015 to the Parliamentary Under Secretary of State. We'll see in the second paragraph she refers to the Society's view that the current system of support was not fit for purpose. If we carry on further down the page, we'll see, she says at the bottom paragraph, we have a great deal of contact with people affected by contaminated blood, and also occasionally meet with the chief executive and chairs of the Macfarlane Trust and Caxton Foundation. She refers to receiving mixed views on the organisations, but the overwhelming experience of those we speak to is dissatisfaction, distress or anger at the way beneficiaries of the organisations are treated. Some of this is directed at the Department of Health in terms of the level of support provided, but much is focused on the lack of respect and understanding of the issues beneficiaries face by the, we go over the page, staff of these organisations. And then the next paragraph says, the experience of the Haemophilia Societies backs this up, including at a recent meeting between myself and the Chief Executive, Jan Barlow, and Chair of the Macfarlane Trust, Roger Evans, where they expressed the opinion that the Department of Health should wait before responding to Penrose, so more people will have died and they will have less to pay out. Again, Mr. Evans, is there anything that you can recall about the meeting that contained any kind of statement from Ms. Barlow or indeed from you to that effect?
No.
Now, you saw this letter, as I understand it, on the 23rd of February 2015 when it was published by the Haemophilia Society. I don't expect you necessarily to remember the precise date, Mr. Evans, but do you recall seeing the letter?
What I do remember is the letter had already been sent and presumably received by Jane Ellison and lots of other people, including the Secretary of State. And I was alerted to it by Jan Barlow, who'd been alerted to the letter by a beneficiary. We were never sent a copy of it.
Would you agree that if anything to that effect had been said, it would have been grossly inappropriate and wrong?
Absolutely. And it wasn't said.
The inquiry will be hearing from Mrs. Carroll later today, Mr. Evans, but Mrs. Carroll's evidence, in writing at least, is to the effect that this was said by Miss Barlow, not by you.
Well, can I strongly make the point that once we knew about this, I will explain what my action was if you would find it helpful.
I'm going to come to that in just a moment, if I may.
Okay, right.
Just pausing there. Can you think of any reason why Mrs. Carroll would say that this had been said by Miss Barlow if it had not been?
Well, I think
I may be wrong.
Thinking of any reason is not a question
you
you
know?
can answer. Yes.
Yes, I'm so sorry. You're absolutely right. So do you know of any reason why Mrs. Carroll might have said this might have said Miss Barlow said this?
No.
Want to come then to the steps that were taken by you once you became aware of the existence and content of this letter. Can we go to WITN 1122043, please? Now, this is an email from Mrs. Carroll. It's not a document you'd have seen at the time, but if we just scroll down further down the page, please, Shomek, you'll see there. If we can go up a bit further, thank you. Perfect. It says on 23rd of February 2015, Liz Carroll wrote, "I just wanted to let you know I've just had a call from Roger Evans, who is very angry about the letter we sent. He says it is libellous as this was not said, and if anything was said, it was him recounting an anecdote. This is absolutely not true, and Jan definitely was the person who said the government should wait before responding to Penrose, so more people will have died and it will be cheaper, and as the years go on, there'll be less people to fight. Roger has said if we do not retract the letter and write to the Minister within 24 hours, they will take legal action. He asked if the board had seen the letter, which I confirmed. I remained calm during the call and said I know what I heard. Roger said he'll be calling Bernard, and I forever damaged the good relationship between the Hemophilia Society and the Macfarlane Trust. Now, first of all, Mr. Evans, is it correct that you telephoned Mrs. Carroll and had a conversation with her?
First of all, as soon as the letter, I became aware of the letter, I endeavoured to, and the letter had gone out before, as I said just now, I rang her chairman, the chair, Bernard Manson, and unfortunately I could not get hold of him. Given the serious allegation, which was not true, which was in the letter which was sent, and I'm not suggesting you should, Ms. Richards, but there were, if we'd scrolled down on the previous document, it had been sent to the Secretary of State, the opposition spokesman on health, the chair of the APPG, about 6 or 8 other MPs, and it had been put on the Hemophilia Society website. So it was very much in the, and some MPs started responding to it. So it was very much in the public domain that this had happened, and quite frankly, I regarded what she had done as being malicious and hurtful, and so something needed to be done straight away. As I could not get hold of the chair, I decided I would ring her to ask her if she would, well, to say largely what I've said to you now, that we would expect the allegation to be withdrawn because it was not said. And incidentally, I don't recall making this comment about I would have said it rather than Jan, and I was annoyed, as you would expect, because of the circumstances, and I presume she wasn't prepared to do that. But certainly only at that stage, with the backing of the Macfarlane Trust Board, where we had a meeting promptly, there seemed to be no alternative but to involve lawyers in order to get a retraction of the wrong allegation which she'd made. And if you just permit me to go on a bit, if this had not been dealt with, it would have made it relationships, to put it mildly, between myself and the Macfarlane Trust beneficiaries extremely difficult if I was seen to have either said or be party to a suggestion that anybody should want some of them to die. And I'd not spent 8 years voluntarily working for the Macfarlane Trust if I felt that way about them. And also, there were indications that politically they might have been wanting to take some action. So there was no alternative but to act very quickly on this and to get the retraction which she gave. If Miss Carroll is now withdrawing what she said in that letter, then that's the first time that's ever happened, and it's interesting.
Just taking it in stages, in relation to this telephone conversation, you've said you don't recall saying words to the effect, if anything was said, it was you recounting an anecdote.
Well, there's no reason why I should have said that any more than Jan Barlow. I mean, there's no logic to that at all. I mean, I don't know why she said that. Also, in one of the correspondence, it says Jan or I had made the comment. Well, she must have known if it had happened, which it didn't, which of us had made the comment.
So is this right? Your evidence is that in the course of the conversation that you had with Mrs. Carroll on the phone, is this right? You don't think you said words to the effect of, if anything was said, it was you recounting an anecdote? Or can you not remember whether that was said or not?
I know I didn't say
it. Is it right that you were very angry about the letter?
Well, you can probably gather from my the way I'm responding to you now. Yes, I was extremely. I did not bully her, which came up in one document, but I just made it very clear that that we wanted a retraction straight away.
Okay. Did you?
But it actually took another 2 weeks to get it, I think.
Do you think you said words to the effect of that this is for, that Mrs. Carroll had forever damaged the good relationship between the Hemophilia Society and the Macfarlane Trust?
I might well have said that, yes.
Now, that was the 23rd of February. If we could go, please, to MACF 5022_026. You'll see this is a statement made the very next day, 24th of February, statement by Liz Carroll, Chief Executive of the Hemophilia Society, regarding the letter from the Hemophilia Society to Jane Ellison, MP, 10th of February 2015. We have been contacted by the Chief Executive and Chairman of the Macfarlane Trust with regard to opinions attributed to them in the letter from the Hemophilia Society to Jane Ellison. They state that the comments in the letter which were attributed to their Chairman and Chief Executive were never made and categorically do not reflect the views of the Chairman, the Chief Executive or anyone else associated with the Macfarlane Trust. We wish to make clear that this was Mrs. Carroll's impression of her recent meeting with the Chairman and Chief Executive, but we are happy to accept their assurance today that this is not the view of the Chairman or the Chief Executive. Now that's the day after your call, Mr. Evans. Why was that not enough to bring the matter to an end?
Well, first, there are several reasons. One is it doesn't give an unequivocal statement that it wasn't made. Secondly, it doesn't address the issue of the letter going, amongst others, to the Minister and the Secretary of State in the political aspect of this, because I would be very surprised if they were to read the Hemophilia Society's newsletter. And we wanted something which was absolutely clear that we'd not said it, because we didn't.
You then instructed solicitors, Wilson's solicitors, to write to the Hemophilia Society on behalf of the Trust, yourself and Ms. Barlow, to say that the allegations were false and malicious, and saying that it might result in legal proceedings against the Hemophilia Society and Mrs. Carroll. Is that right?
Yes.
That was the 26th of February. 27th of February, so the next day, if we look at WITN 3078023, got that, Shomik? Oh, you don't have that? WITN 30. Let's see if I've got the right reference. Sorry, let me just check. 3078023. If you go into the materials for Mrs. Carroll's evidence this afternoon, it'll be there. So if we go to the next page, this is the letter that was sent in response. So your solicitors wrote on the 26th of February, solicitors for the Hemophilia Society wrote on the 27th of February. If we go down the page, it says, in the shared hope it will be possible to resolve this matter without recourse to costly and time-consuming litigation, we're instructed to put forward the following. And then there was an offer of a retraction and apology that would be published to the original recipients, an undertaking not to further publish the words complained of, removing the matter from the statement from any online source. Now, that was then the 27th of February. Just want to take it stage by stage, if I may. You then wrote to Mr. Manson, if we look at MACF 5059_011. oh no, that's the wrong letter. I'm sorry. My references are obviously erroneous. We'll come on to that. We'll come back to that. I'll come back to this letter in chronological order, Mr. Evans. 4th of March. I'm hoping this will be the right reference, Shomik. HSOC 0029441_042. So there's a further letter from the McFarlane Trust's solicitors and representing you and Ms Barlow as well, 4th of March 2015, with various counter suggestions in relation to the terms of the retraction and apology, if we just go down the page. There was the insistence or the reference in paragraph 2 to the inclusion of the word false allegations, and then at 6, a requirement that the Hemophilia Society pay your Miss Barlow's and the McFarlane Trust's legal fees. Now, I'm not going to go through each and every response from lawyer to lawyer, Mr. Evans, because the letters speak for themselves. What came back was a suggestion of a form of wording which was to withdraw the incorrect allegation. Your solicitors insisted on the inclusion of the word false, and in due course a compromise was reached. Before we then look at the letter you wrote to Bernard Manson, I'll ask you this. Why did you, Miss Barlow, and the McFarlane Trust resort to the threat of legal proceedings?
Well, I think for the reasons I've described a few minutes ago, namely that the allegation was an extremely serious one. And certainly from my point of view, Jan Barlow did not make this statement, but from my point of view, it was never suggested for me to go to a meeting with the chief executive of the Hemophilia Society and for her to accept that I'd not made a statement, and then a letter goes to the Secretary of State for Health saying I did make a comment about beneficiaries dying, and also appearing on the Hemophilia Society website was extremely damaging for lots of reasons. All that I wanted, which Jan Barlow presumably wanted, well, she did want it, was a very clear apology. If Miss Carroll had accepted at the outset that that was the case, I dare say it would have been possible. And Mr. Manson had been involved, I dare say a letter could have been agreed between the parties to be published without the intervention of solicitors and the occurrence of fees.
Was any attempt made by you or Ms Barlow or anyone else on the McFarlane Trust board to resolve the matter without recourse to solicitors, other than through the telephone conversation you had with Mrs Carroll on the 23rd of February?
Well, I did speak to Mr Manson on the phone afterwards. I can't remember how many days afterwards, but I did that.
Do you recall whether it was your decision that the solicitors' letters should include a warning that legal proceedings might be taken against Mrs Carroll personally as well as the Hemophilia Society?
Well, all the actions we took on this were with the full support of the McFarlane Trust Board, and I was very careful that whatever action we took was that of the board. But I'm not unsympathetic with that statement, no.
Do you consider...
I'm not sure it was ever really appreciated how serious the allegation was.
Do you consider that the way in which the McFarlane Trust and yourself and Ms Barlow dealt with this through the instruction of solicitors and the various to and fro of correspondence was a sensible and appropriate use of the Macfarlane Trust's time and resources?
Well, I think we had no alternative.
And then if we can go to the letter that I put up earlier, which is your letter to Mr. Manson, MACF 5059_011, please, Shomik. So this is you, 17th of March 2015, to Bernard Manson. I write following the events of the last 3 weeks, which have culminated in the Hemophilia Society and your chief executive, Liz Carroll, issuing an unreserved apology for the false allegations, etc. The board of MFT has found the events of the last 3 weeks deeply regrettable. They've caused distress to many beneficiaries. MFT has a long history of good relations with the Hemophilia Society, but this has deteriorated over the last 12 months, and the relationship has been deeply damaged by what's happened in the last 3 weeks. Now, if we leave aside the previous 3 weeks, Mr. Evans, what were you referring to when you said that the Macfarlane Trust's history of good relations with the Hemophilia Society had deteriorated over the preceding 12 months?
Well, what I would have been referring to is I think you'll find that Ms. Carroll and Ms. Barlow, Jan Barlow, took up their posts at about the same time in 2013. And from the feedback I got from Jan Barlow, I did not think that their relationship was a particularly comfortable one.
Okay. Can you...
I had a good relationship with Bernard Manson. I did not have a huge amount of contact with him, but there was certainly no issue there. The other difficulty with the relationships between the board was that there was one trustee board member on both the Hemophilia Society board and the Macfarlane Trust who was not a helpful liaison.
So the suggestion that there had been a deterioration in relationship over the preceding 12 months, that's based upon Ms. Barlow's reports to you of her meetings with Mrs. Carroll, is it? There's nothing else to which you're referring?
Probably more so, the latter point I made. But I am not making, in this letter, and I'm not now making any value judgment about exactly what the relationship, how the relationship difficulty worked out between them, and whether it was one person or the other who was causing those to happen. And relationships are much more complicated than that, as you know only too well.
And then you say in the next paragraph, you refer to the Hemophilia Society's right to appoint trustees, and you say you refer to amendment to the trust deed, and then you say, in light of recent events, the board has decided not to invite the Hemophilia Society to nominate a replacement appointment for the vacancy that now exists. And then you go on in the last paragraph to say that there's no confidence that there can be a constructive relationship with Mrs. Carroll, and MFT is not willing to work with her. Did you consider whether it was in the interest of the Macfarlane Trust's beneficiary community to remove the invitation to the Hemophilia Society to nominate a replacement trustee, or to decline to work with the Hemophilia Society's chief executive indefinitely?
Taking the first one, I cannot remember the rationale behind that. Perhaps I should, but I cannot. I think we did actually make an appointment. I think was made. I think we did go back up to three trustees, but I'm not quite sure about that. Well, from my point of view, and also I'm sure it was a set case with Jan Barlow, when such a serious allegation is wrongly made, is Ms. Carroll made, then how could it be possible to be able to trust anyone in working with them that they're going to tell the truth about you in the future? That was the problem, and I did say that we would be content to work with the with the chair. I think is it in that paragraph, and that
In
we
the last
would relate
paragraph.
to Bernard. Yeah, and that. I mean, the other issue which might have helped to clear this up is that. And I did not raise this at the time. I've thought about this issue quite a lot since then. In my opinion, the Hemophilia Society did not deal with this internally properly, and either they assumed that Liz Carroll hadn't made this comment, although she did issue a clear statement, which I hope she's not now retracting. And I would have thought that they would have held an internal inquiry to identify exactly what happened and then decide whether they should be taking any action. But judging from an earlier email which you screened, which I don't think I'd ever seen until the last day or two, there seemed to be sympathy with the Hemophilia Society trustees rather than having a proper inquiry into what happened. And if this had been properly worked through and worked out, there might have been ways we could have had a modus operandi rather than merely through the chair.
Do you consider the way in which you, Ms Barlow, and the Macfarlane Trust Board handled this matter was, and by that I'm including reference to what's said in this letter in terms of the way you were going to work with the Haemophilia Society going forward, do you consider that was properly in the interests of the Macfarlane Trust beneficiary community, and if so, why?
Absolutely, because if we'd not taken the route we did, there would have been a impression out there that we were at the least sympathetic to some of the beneficiaries dying. And that's a terrible thing to say. And we needed to deal with that. I don't recall in practice that the stance we took with Miss Carroll would have had any distinctive effect on relationships. I think, which I should have perhaps said earlier on, that I did say in my statement that the Haemophilia Society, instead of campaigning to get more money in for their beneficiaries, seem more interested in criticising in the ways I've mentioned to you the Macfarlane Trust Board rather than trying to get more money for the beneficiaries.
Well, again, no doubt that's a question we can pick up with Haemophilia Society witnesses. One final letter on this issue. Shomik, it's MACF 5059_051. Whilst we're waiting for it, it's Mr. Manson's response to your letter of the 17th of March. It refers to a letter of the 19th of March, but I think it's probably a response. 2nd of April 2015, he says in the second paragraph, you should be aware that Liz Carroll continues to be the CEO of the Society with the full approval and support of our Board of Trustees. And in operational matters, it is generally appropriate that she speaks directly with the Trust. I'm confident that she and Jen will be able to work together professionally as needed in order to support the people who are the beneficiaries of both our charities. Then he talks about the trust deed issue, and then in the last paragraph says, I trust a period of calm will help the situation. Did you, in response to this, as far as you can recall, rescind the decision that had been made not to work with Mrs. Carroll at all?
No, we didn't.
And is it right that, as far as you're concerned, I'm not going to ask you to speak for Ms. Barlow, you did not speak to Mrs. Carroll again?
I might have seen her at one or two, certainly one. I think I might have seen her in an APPG meeting when I just acknowledged her and, nodded my head or something. We never had a conversation. I certainly didn't, as it were, snub her, but I had no need to. One thing perhaps to add, which may be helpful, as I said, Bernard Manson and I had a good relationship. We didn't meet that often, but we had a good one. At some time afterwards, I can't recall how long, he stood down from the chair and a new chairman was appointed whose name escapes me, who I think was based in the Northwest. And I wrote to him soon after his appointment, the gist of my letter being that, to congratulate him or whatever on his appointment, but to ask if we could have an early meeting. Now, my intention there was to see if we could get some ground to move this forward. I think I got an acknowledgement. And I also suggested I'd be very happy to get to Manchester to meet him, or for him to come to London. I think I got an acknowledgement, but there certainly was no appetite to have a meeting with me, and I never did. If that meeting had taken place, it might well be that there would be a way forward. But the strength of feeling over all this with Jan Barlow as well as myself is that I really didn't have a propensity to try and persuade Jan to have any sort of relationship with Miss Carroll.
Sir, other than one or two kind of final sweep-up questions, those complete my questions for Mr. Evans, and I note it's just gone 1 o'clock. So if we break for lunch now, the invitation is for recognised legal representatives and core participants to send to Ms. Scott and myself over lunch any further questions that they wish us to consider.
Yes. Now, do you think 2 o'clock will give you sufficient time to field those questions?
If we could say 2:05, I think an hour should be sufficient, yes.
2:05. 2:05.